All right, we're back for the TTAC finals. I missed the start of this game because I'm an absolute moron, but we are back. One thing that amuses me already from just what we're seeing here is I have said in positions with 1, 4, and 7 that Akiyama checks 5 earlier in his priority list than any other top player. So it's fun to see that occurring in closed as well. Now, Turd's first turn here. There are a lot of decks. There are some stipulations that limit the cards. Turdz was mentioning that there's a rule set of you cannot have that many repeat numbers in your hand, and the non repeat numbers must have unique combinations. And there are only so many cards that fit that criteria. You basically have to use 7-5-4-3, 7-5-4-2, 6-5-4-3. At least two of those three you must use, which is a rather it's a really interesting limitation, I think, for closed, because it says you can narrow down the types of cards they might have available. And we know they both use their 7-5-4-3. We know Turdz has now used his 7-5-4-2. That means he must have a 6-5-4-3 or a 7-6 corner in his hand. I would expect he's running a 7-6 corner, but that's interesting information from Akiyama, who can then look at what 7-6 corners are available, and particularly given that we know Turdz played the card in 2 and one of the 4-3-5-7s, there's no way Turdz ran the 2-5-6-6, right? He's not running 3 cards for one corner. So Turdz presumably also used the 6-6-6-1. So we've seen 3 of Turdz's cards, and we would expect his 7-6 to be either a corner for 7 or a corner for 9. All right, they are playing very quickly. This kind of looks like Turdz might be sweeping. If his 6-7 is facing the right way and he has a plus wall on the 7-5-2-5, he is very likely winning unless Akiyama can call a bluff going in 9. Yeah, I mean, I guess we'll see. All rules are in effect. I would rather have first turn here, but I don't know what cards they have. Given that Turdz just played another card for the left side of the board, I really think he is a 7-6 corner for 9. And we didn't see much of the game, so I don't have great evidence for that. But if I'm Akiyama, I'm putting Turdz, this is level 4, on like a 7-2-3-6 for 9. And then you just have to play something. Now, I don't know what configuration it is. I guess it could be a 7-6-4-1. I don't know which of those are available given the decks, but it looks like a lot of decks are here, so there should be a lot of options. I would very strongly be putting Turdz on one of those 7-6s, and you kind of got to just dodge that. Now, it's a 7. If it's a 7-2-3-6, you can't have a 6 facing up if you try to dodge in 9. It's pretty scary to do. You probably do end up going in 6, and I don't know what cards Akiyama has. We could try to figure it out. We know he played 4-3-5-7 and 7-5-2-5. I strongly suspect he played 2-5-6-6. So he's used his 2 double numbers. He should have a 7-6 remaining himself, and then maybe a 7-5-4-2. Very scary. Either player could win at this point, depending on if Turdz is a good sweeper. If Turdz is something like 7-2-3-6 and Akiyama can play, like a 2-5-7-4, I don't know if that card exists, in 6, then Akiyama wins. He flips 3 and he's safe. So given that we don't know the cards, Turdz may know he can't lose, and hence why he played so quickly in 3, but we don't know that. And so from this perspective, like, I would definitely favor Turdz, but it's sort of the first versus second turn and closed all boiled down to a single moment of like the whole game of first turn I think should be better here, but there's probably some way to dodge into a tie. There might conceivably be some win if your cards line up, but there's a good chance it's losing. Akiyama dodges. It was the 7-2-3-6, and Akiyama dodges it. Really nice decision. Akiyama clearly went 5-7-4-2 and 9, dodging the 7-2-3-6 sweeper. Yeah. We don't know what his remaining card was, so he presumably had 4-3-5-7 and 5-7-4-2 as a pair. 2-5-6-6 is for 3, 7-5-2-5 probably counts as for 9. So he maybe has a card for 1 left. And so maybe Akiyama didn't actually have a way to take the 5 facing down from 3, which makes it easier to choose the dodge move and hope for a tie. But I think either way, nicely handled and nicely read on the final card. But also one of those things like this rule set is quite limiting for some of your cards, but that actually makes it, I think, from in my opinion, a really interesting closed rule set because you could make the read that Turdz probably is something like 7236. I happen to be saying the exact card. I easily could have been saying some different card, but it shows that this card was a predictable option and Akiyama played well around it. Which is not to say that Turdz should have done anything differently. I think he set up this endgame to be very favorable for him. But the rule set means there are some calls you can make, and sometimes they pay off. I wish I'd caught the whole game, but I think we got a pretty interesting piece of it. Yeah. It's so hard to imagine Turdz was running 2475, 4357, and 2566. So my guess is the game went something like Turdz starts 4357 and 7 because he has the double corners, so he plays a weak corner. Akiyama takes it from 4. Turdz takes that from 1. Akiyama goes 5, and then the moves we've seen. And that would align with the correct color of the cards and whose cards I think were in whose hand. So my guess is the move order of this game was 9, 6, 3, 5, 2, 8, 1, 9, 6. That seems sensible. All right, cool tie there. I love reads on the final card. Again, I think this is actually. Sometimes I don't like stuff that really limits you to exact things. I don't really like that in open because there are two kind of easy mistakes for a rule set creation in open. One is to do something that cuts off so many things, there's only like one choice left. And instead of like forcing creativity by taking away standard options, it enforces lack of creativity because it gives you very limited options. And the other version of that is if there's a world where there's like two or three types of power cards on top and almost everyone uses some combination of those cards, and you're like, I'm going to get rid of two of those types. Maybe the last one now just runs free and suddenly there's no choosing or having variety because the third type is just the only really good type of card left. And so there can be danger in leaving that. And there can also be danger in what if, when you eliminate the best three options, the new top option is much worse to play than the previous three? I think that can happen as well. And yeah, especially on levels where the most popular option is a dynamic tri-directional card, and the second most and like the third most popular option is like big corners. I think it can get less fun as you get rid of the more dynamic cards and just become more about big corners that don't play that interestingly together. But this for closed, I really like because, again, I think it's really nice to be able to make reads. So this was the second game on the open-closed rule set. The first one was an open game, which presumably you have already seen my hopefully excellent video on it. I've already forgotten what you're doing. Sorry, I'm trying to find it. I think Turdz was a little ahead in that one, but I don't remember it so well. Oh yeah, Akiyama played 1, Turdz played 9. I do remember that. 9-8-2. A formation a setup I don't like, so I have blotted it out of my memory. Here, Turdz got first turn in the closed. I'm pleased Turdz got first turn in the closed because Akiyama got first turn on a previous closed rule set that I think was kind of a free win for first turn on closed. So it's nice that he didn't get that advantage again. I want it to be somewhat balanced. And here, Turdz gets another first turn, and given that I think this rule set is less biased towards first turn, I would now consider the closed turn luck distribution fairly evenly distributed between the two players. So after this game, I think we can say not a significant closed advantage to either player. Now, you might argue a significant closed advantage to Turdz, who now has 2 first turns in closed to Akiyama's 1. I do think the other rule set was significantly more first turn favored, but your mileage on that may vary. That said, I really like what Akiyama did the last game. You so often get those spots where there's 2 squares, a side and a corner next to each other. One person has pretty clearly kept a sweeper for both, And the question is, do you go the more ambitious move in the side square, or do you go the move hoping for a tie in the corner? And it can, I think, be really hard to pull the trigger on the hoping for a tie, because if you lose there, it feels terrible, because some of the time you lose there, the opponent actually didn't keep a sweeper, but they kept a card that happens to be really good at punishing you making that move. If they happen to have a really bad corner for it, sometimes it lines up better if you play it the way that looks like it's dodging but actually doesn't, and those losses are so depressing. But the other thing that can happen is, like, they almost always have a free capture on the card in 5, so it's just like your greatest aspiration is a 5-5 tie, and especially when you only have a 5 up, not something like a 6 or a 7. And in this case, the 5 up was better than a 6. But yeah, I think it really takes some form of guts to pull the trigger on that kind of move and just be like, this is the right decision. I have no winning chances at all, and I need to kind of admit that to myself. So Turdz plays his 5-2-7-5. We know this is one of the 2 double numbers in his hand, so a kind of interesting card to use immediately. We also know Turdz has tended to, when he goes with a double corner, use that double corner. We know at least last game, if I got the move order right, that Turdz likes to use his double corner in the weak corner, much in the way that Tezuka, I think, has pioneered, and Piggyman as well. Again, everything goes back to TTAC16, where Piggyman and Tezuka really showed off a lot of cool tech that is worth thinking about. One of the more educational, I think, tournaments to think about. I should do a ranking of like my favorite tournaments of the return, not for like how well did I do, because TTAC14 is not a tournament I did very well in. But I mean, I double closed Delhi, so that's a nice result for me. But also, like, I didn't beat him in the open, so it's not something to feel amazing about. Um, but yeah, so a tournament I went out in round 2, but like just a tournament where the Tezuka Piggy run to the finals, I think, was really cool, and that they showed off a lot of fun ideas. Tezuka with some cool weak corner play, Piggy with a whole variety of stuff. Yeah, check out TTAC 14. But if we're following that, one thing about Turdz is we saw him play some weak corners like last game, where I think he had doubled up on that corner. And so it made sense because you play one of them as a weak corner and the rest of your hand is balanced. But this is a mid-strength corner. And the closest thing we've seen to this in recent times with Turdz is his game against Vid in the semifinals, where he started 5-4-2-3 and 1. And that is a 4 and a 2 facing out. And for level 1, I would kind of consider that a mid-strength corner. You might call it a weak one, but it doesn't really play like a weak corner for your hand. Because if you play the 5-4-2-3 and 3, you've just used your card for 7. So you've used your card that is the most power facing 3 in 3, which is why Turdz tends to do this when he has 2 corners for 7, so that he still has a lot of power facing towards that. One benefit of the kind of half or mid corner is probably you're not using your card that most directly faces the action. Turdz hasn't used his corner for 1, so his best sweeper still faces where the action is. And so I think in some ways this makes it less likely he's running a double corner hand, and more likely he's just running a hand of cards that are all okay seeing this card here, in a way that when you play a full weak corner, often, it's weak, but the rest of your hand isn't really organized to face it unless you're going the double corner strat. On the other hand, I don't like this. I have very little information. But the reason I'm hesitant here is 5s are annoying to take. And at some point, Turdz will have to take this back. And how many cards in his hand have double captures? If he's running 6-6-6-1 again, that card does. If he has a 7-6 for 1, that card does. But he's probably not running both those cards. Maybe he is. 3-6-7-4 and 6-6-6-1. Maybe he's running both those cards. So there's a chance he has 2 cards with captures both ways. But a lot of the times with this high numbers facing out, you're kind of committed to 1 card recapturing. And because that card needs to have high numbers facing down and right, that card can't really capture much of anywhere else. If we compare this to Seto's games against Akiyama in the semifinals, where he was playing Doom Train or Zerace as an AA rare, he could take it back either way with one card, and that card could have high numbers facing out. Low low corners can have this effect as well. If you play, like a 1-1, 8-8, and 7, any card can double capture it, so you can keep cards that have good play in other directions. Here, that seems tougher to do. I'm going to pause the video for a bit, for just a moment, because I have the sun right in my eyes where it is, and I want to lower the shades, and I don't want to hear you to have to hear me clattering about. So back in a sec. So here, I'm reminded that Smokes has argued on general principles, and right now, given that we don't know what cards they have, we are running entirely on general principles. That Smokes has argued on general principles that adjacent corners are underplayed enclosed against weaker corners. Not that they're underplayed against strong corners, but that against corners with weaker numbers facing out, moves like this are a little underplayed. Seems fine to me. I like creating challenges on second turn, but it is very evident that is not remotely required to good second turn play. And also, as long as your play structures where it isn't. Like, if you play only weak stuff out and you aim for an X on second turn every game, you're just going to get swept at the end and lose horribly. But there are other ways to play where that's not the case. Now, the other thing I want to say here is every game Turdz plays against Seto, you can check, it's factual. Every single one, you will never find an exception. That is, some would say technically false, but every time I click their games, this happens. Or if I click it and it doesn't happen, I don't say anything and wait for the next game, and it inevitably will that one. Is when they play trade together, they tend to play the three corners. And I think Turdz was saying they've moved off it a little, but this makes me think Turdz is likely to play in 1 or 7. But there's some high enough numbers facing out that I think it becomes harder and harder to have a sweeper here. Also, I would mention that Akiyama, in his interview from a couple years ago, mentioned his favorite positions, his favorite structure or setup. I tend to use structure to mean position after 5 moves, like the Z, T, or S, or Q, and setup to mean positions after 3 turns or 4 turns, like the 3 corners, the L, that's after 4 turns, etc. Akiyama has said he really likes defending against the 3 corners. Okay. This is the standard move to make in open. In open, the capture in the in-between square with the highest number facing out is the move most likely to win if you know they don't have good setups against it. In closed, you don't know that. Does that mean it's wrong to do enclosed? It is wrong to do enclosed in a non-combo game. Non-combo, this is just positionally inaccurate. In a combo game, it's complicated, and I don't know Turdz' cards, but if at the start of the game it's like 50, 25, 25, 50 first turn win, 25% tie, 25% second turn win, which means if you ignore ties, about a 2-to-1 ratio of first turn wins to losses. And if you include ties, that's around 62, that is 62.5% for first turn. So if we set the baseline at 62.5% for first turn, I would probably be down to like 58 now, something like that. I'm just pulling numbers out of my ass. Don't take it too seriously. I have received messages. Are they relevant? I should also say this is the decider of the match, yada yada. So Stuff actually recommended the 6661 to Turdz as a possible sweeper. Now, Stuff typoed it and says he suggested 6616, which I do not believe is a card, but 6661 is what he meant, which does suggest I correctly guessed the rule set of the last game. Okay. Akiyama has gone for the L. And I believe we saw 2475. We've probably seen cards that land pretty well in 5. However, this card overpowers 9. So given that Akiyama Well, I guess Akiyama, wherever he played, he had to overpower. But there is combo chain potential here. And knowing how Turdz likes to play L's, like everyone has some preference in an L. And one thing that's been interesting recently is like I really like to make moves in two work, in open. I look at two way earlier in my calculations than other top players, and I get way more excited about two. And sometimes I'm correct, and sometimes I'm speaking nonsense. But in open games, when I comment them out of the L, if I'm watching first turn, you will see me get over enthused about moves in the equivalent of two, however it's rotated. Akiyama finds moves in one. Ooh, Turdz had the plus. Okay, this is now very good for Turdz, because that cannot be comboed back. This has to be very good for Turdz. Even if Akiyama has something good for two, it just doesn't play through. So that lined up really well for Turdz. It's unlikely Akiyama had the same card for 5, because it would be weird to run 7-5-2-5 and 7-2-4-5. What was I saying? Yeah, I like to look in 2. Everyone checks 5. So like 5 is one of the first squares you check no matter who you are. But for me, the square I'm like next most excited about is 2. For Turdz, it has consistently been 4. And Turdz has found a bunch of moves in 4. You can find some this tournament. In the L's, his win against Vid. Seto checks 7. And one thing funny about Turdz' win in 4, and Turdz actually has won multiple games in 4 recently, is he will get a message from Seto going, why didn't you just play the win in 7? Oh, I guess this works too. And Seto will reliably be correct about that because Seto, I think, just is the GOAT calculator. And I should say, GOAT calculator doesn't just mean you're really good at running through a bunch of variations quickly, which is a fantastic skill and like one worth celebrating on its own. But to be a really elite calculator, you also have to have a really good intuition for which moves matter. So you're not just calculating really fast, you're calculating the right lines. And I think Seto is just a phenomenal combination of both. So it's, he'll find a win and he'll find it faster than anyone else does. And then Turdz will play a different win and Seto will go, what are you doing? And then we'll correctly realize this wins too. So like I think Seto checks 7, I check 2, Turdz checks 4, Akiyama checks 1. Akiyama has found a lot of cool moves in 1. He was the one who in some recent thing was pointing out a possibility in 1, I think in a Turdz game actually. I think it was Akiyama against Turdz, where Turdz missed a win in 1 against him that Akiyama did see. So I guess, and actually I have no idea what Deli's preference is. I think he just checks everything. But I think if you look at a lot of the top players, we have quite different preferences in where we look first in the L. It's actually one of the most varied positions for what different top players' instincts are. And I think that's really cool. Okay, so where do you go if you're Akiyama here? My suspicion is you just play 7 and hope Turdz doesn't have 4. And there's not a ton else to do. If you have a big setup in 1, it could be really dangerous for Turdz to go in 2. And it could be that if Turdz goes in 7, it's likely to overpower that 2 facing to the left. We've already seen Turdz use 2 cards with a 2 to the right. He certainly does not have another card with a 2 or lower to the right. So Turdz might not be able to play in 7 without walking into a combo, and he might not be able to play in 2 without walking into a combo. So there is like legit reason to think strongly about going in 1 here. Because the combo potential is actually pretty neat. Because again, it's scary for Turdz to go in either 2 or 7, and it's scary to go in 4 because that could set up combos for Akiyama in 7. So I think 1 could be really interesting here. All right, it's over. And I guess I'll find out later what happened. This ends the tournament, so congratulations to Turdz, who comes through with a first turn enclosed and gets the win. Can we figure out what happened? I think so. Turdz must have had 5-7-5-2 because we know Akiyama had 7-5-2-5. No, that's not the case because 5-2-7-5 as well. I can't imagine Turdz was running 4-3-5-7, and I can't imagine, as well as these 2 2s to the right, And I can't imagine he was running both 4673 and 3674 because I think that's against the rules. So Turdz was running one of the 7643s and 5752. And we need the right configuration of final cards. So if Akiyama played 4357 and 7, then I think Turdz comboed it in 4. But then Akiyama wouldn't have 5 at the end because none of the remaining cards flipped 5. So for 5 to be Akiyama's, because there's no plus wall, right? No, there is plus wall. What am I talking about? Yeah, so I think the game Akiyama went 7, which is logical. Turdz had the plus in 4, so he took it. And at that point, the game is over. Akiyama plays 2. Turdz does have the capture in 1, but the game is over either way. I think that's the move order that makes sense. Because I don't think you can get this configuration as easily out of 2. So I think our final move order is 9, 3, 6, 8, 5, 7, which I thought, yeah, Akiyama probably has to go for and just hope Turdz doesn't have the plus, and Turdz had the plus. So that's just really tough. Yeah, Turdz had pluses the whole way. Tough game. Tough way to go out. But Turdz did win the Open here, and I think is a very deserving winner of this tournament. I do think he played the best over the course of the tournament. I've started running Solver on stuff, and yeah, Turdz had a magnificent tournament. I believe he was lost in one open game the whole tournament, and it was actually from the first round, round 2, I guess, against Sir Smokes. Tremendous tournament from Turdz. Let's talk a bit about legacy here, because I did little write-ups. So Akiyama went 3-1 here, including 1-1 versus winners. Turdz went 4-0, and I believe is the first player to beat a winner in every round of the tournament. I'm not sure of that, but I think so. He also reaches by far his highest peak elo. He had peaked for most of his career around 2250, sometimes bouncing up to that, getting up to that, dropping back down. But he never had quite the string of results in a row to get much past that. But with his win in Triad Wars 14, he ended up getting almost to 2300, and following that up with this win here in TTAC, Triad Wars 16, and following that up with this win here in TTAC16, he jumps to 2360, which is actually really high on the all-time ELO peak list, and is going to jump all his scores in my stats really highly. So I wanted to talk about, I have this Hall of Fame stat, and I can't take you to the page because it will spoil what I'm talking about, but it combines various statistics into one, like all-in-one, here is my all-time tournament player ranking. And it's sort of meant to be out of 100, though it doesn't end up actually working that way. You can be rated higher than 100. But I originally set it so the highest rated player was a little under 100, so that it would be sort of feel like out of 100. It's not really percentage. Like if someone's a 30 and someone's a 60, that doesn't mean like if the 30% player had won twice as many games, they'd be a 60 or anything like that. It's a lot more complex inputs than that, but also that doesn't really like make much sense because a player that averages 2-1 versus a player that averages 1-1, the 2-1 player in one sense has twice as many wins per win. In another sense, they're a 2/3 player while the other's a 50% player. They're like not double. In another sense, they have a much more than double chance of actually winning a tournament. So, anyways, okay. I'm being confusing. My point is, it's a score out of 100. I think it's a pretty good ranking. If someone has a 47 or higher, they're in my top 100. 47 is kind of the point where you become top 100. 53 is a top 50 player. So examples of players who are around a 53 are Kazdon or Fusion Cloud, Amo22, Suikoden, the lower end of tournament winners, Yevon, Koops. These are all players who are close to a 53. If you get up to a 60 plus, 60 or higher, so about the same gap as from a top 100 to a top 50 player, for a top 50 to a top 30 player, you're top 30. So this is players like Meta, Scythe, Kazik, Mafi Josie. are players around top 30 and are around to 60. 65 gets you top 20. So think Sir Smokes, Tezuka, Kaus Debonair. And 70 has traditionally been the top 10. But now there are 14 players who have been around 70. If we get up to 75, I think there's a case for top 5 all time. Great Sephiroth, Doc Evil, Nightwish, and MC are around 75. And I think those are 4 players that have some case for 5th all time. Some people would put Doc much higher, but okay. And then the Mount Rushmore, the big 4 guys, Delial, Seto, Yojimbo, and myself are like 90 plus. So there's a huge jump to those 4. Those 4 have achieved way more than anyone else. But entering this tournament, Akiyama and Turdz were both around that 70 point, with Turdz a little higher. So one thing I want to talk about is how they've moved. Before that, let's talk about other movement from this tournament. Vid with the semifinals goes from just under 70 to just over 70. He stays 14th all time, which is where he was. He was a touch behind Akiyama, who was also just under 70, and he stays behind, so he's still 14th on my list. But Vid keeps racking up results. Vid is a results getter. Seto actually reached his peak rating during this tournament, following up being just undefeated in the last few tournaments he played, having won Ultimisia and been undefeated in the last TTAC. And so he actually reached a peak elo rating, given that he's always very high and had a really nice undefeated run here for a while, eventually ended by Akiyama. I feel really bad for Seto because I think his TTAC record is actually maybe the greatest of anyone ever. He's played 3 tournaments. In the first one, I believe he won every game and every match until he reached the finals against Yojimbo, who he beat in the Open, only to get double closed. The next TTAC he played was last year's, and he was undefeated there and withdrew in the semifinals for personal reasons. And this year's TTAC, he makes the semifinals again, plays it, beats Akiyama in the Open in just a fantastic match. I think that's the best match of the tournament, and loses in double closed again. I believe Seto has never been beaten in Open in TTAC, and we all know he's a tremendous closed player. He very easily could have like 3 TTAC wins on this performance, and instead he has 0. So Seto actually, raises some of his stats, and deservedly so. It's very hard to raise his stats if you're Seto because the baseline is so high. But yeah. Stuff with another really nice performance following up his finals in Triad Wars, the last traditional major that we had. In this tournament, he double closed. It is double closed, but he beats Delial, and because beating someone that highly rated is really, really good for you, he ends up losing to Akiyama, but he does really well against really good opposition. Stuff actually breaks over 53 and joins the top 50 in my Hall of Fame stat. So really nice showings from an old school player who is moving rather rapidly up the rankings. Okay, let's talk about our big 2. Akiyama, our loser of this finals, is the youngest of the all-time greats, like the newest player to jump into that like top 10, 15 all-time crew. Before he'd played 10 tournaments, he'd gone on a 16-4 run, and if you've watched my previous videos, had one of the best years anyone's ever had in 2015, including beating Yojimbo in the Adia finals. In the return, he's been a steady winner, but not quite grabbed his second title. He's now made 2 finals in the return, a whole pile of icons. He just only loses to the very top players. This was his first deep run ever in a TTAC, and he made the finals. Yeah, I mean, Akiyama continues to add to a really impressive legacy. He's an obviously wonderful player. This doesn't end up being the breakthrough that jumps him into that elite crowd with multiple titles, but he's, MC doesn't have multiple titles either. Akiyama is pretty firmly somewhere in that elite crowd, and he goes up in my Hall of Fame ratings. He breaks 70, and he stays 13th all time, but he is starting to close in really close in on that top 10. And given that, my Hall of Fame rating is very far from perfect, I think anyone in the top 14, and maybe a couple others, but I really think anyone in the top 14, you could make a serious case for a top 10 player. And I kind of hope they all consider themselves top 10 players of all time because they've all done enough to deserve to. And Akiyama is in that crew and still rising. Turdz, on the other hand. Turdz is now, if you get rid of the big four, is number one in every counting stat. This is his fifth title, tied with Seto and only behind Delial, Yojimbo, and myself. He is now passed me, I think, in quarterfinals and maybe semifinals or finals as well. He is fifth or higher in every counting stat. Total tournament wins, I believe he's also up there. I think he's now fourth in total tournament wins. I think he was tied with Vid coming in, but now takes clear fourth. He's top 4 or 5 in icons, semifinals, finals, championships, whatever you want. If the top 4 were disappeared from the game, he's number one in everything. Also, his win rate is trickling up. A lot of players, it's kind of tough to increase your win rate at this point because there are so few rounds in tournaments, you can't rack up that many wins. And also, so many of the rounds are against other elite players that it's hard to just up your win percentage. Turdz has been upping his win percentage. Turdz has been a long time 60-ish% player, and now he's getting, I think he's closing in on 65%. He might reach 65%, which is like, it's going to be very hard for him to ever reach something like 70% just because he's played so long at a 60% level that really locks you in. But he is doing really incredible stuff and moving up in just every way. I also think he played just phenomenally this tournament. If you go back and look at his open games, I think Turdz was on an even higher level than he was in Triad Wars 16, which he also won, playing at, I thought, the highest level he had ever played. And I think he has somewhat surpassed that here. How much does it help his Hall of Fame score? Well, he came in at 71 and change, and he jumps to, and I haven't updated everything, but he's going to jump to at least 73, which gets him into the top 10. It officially passes, I think he was right next to Slash of Time, definitely passes Slash, definitely passes Kana, and is now just a little bit behind Kamikaze for 9th. And it's just still going up, man. Turdz has been so good. So anyway, that's not super interesting stuff maybe, but Turdz now, for a while, Turdz has had a case for top 10 all time because his counting stats are so good. And the argument against has been he has been an accumulator who has played longer but peaked clearly lower than all the people he's being compared to. And I think for a long time that was true. Now, I don't know. In the return, in the last 8 majors, he has 5 finals and 3 championships. This is an insanely good run. Yeah. Again, I think this is the first time anyone's beaten a winner in every round, beating Smokes, Tezuka, Vid, and Akiyama. I sort of thought Triad Wars 16 was the crowning achievement for Turdz. It will never be the breakthrough of Vincent, but I think this might be even better. And to get these two almost in a row, and in a row if you're only counting like the traditional majors, wow. Amazing job by Turdz, fantastic job by Akiyama. Props especially to Vid, Seto, and stuff as well. I think they were the other 3 most exciting players of this tournament. And I guess that's all I've got, but yeah, huge congrats to Turdz. What a run, and what a high level of play throughout. You can go back and watch the open stuff he played, or you've already watched it. So good, such good work. I think Turdz has never been better and never been more consistent.